My name is Matt Wolsfeld. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the University of Saskatchewan's Office of Sustainability. Been with the SWRC as a board member for about 4 or 5 years now, and I'm really proud to be helping to moderate our lightning talk session today. I just want to thank really quickly Call to Recycle for sponsoring the session and bringing it to everybody. In along the lines of our Brave New World theme this year, we've gone with a Mythbusters theme for our lightning talk session. So all of our presenters have taken on one of the myths that they see in the waste world and trying to set it straight as best they can. So without further ado, we'll jump into our video here and we'll start going through our lightning talks. Joanne, if you want.
Wow, people just love beaches. They're always going off on vacation and then coming back to tell me all about the beaches they sat on. Beaches loom large in people's imaginations as luxurious, precious escapes where they can be in the sun and the water at once. They imagine an idyllic scene where they can relax and walk in the sand. And I always think, walk on sand? Walking on sand is terrible. It is difficult, it takes forever, and it makes me tired. And then when you add heat to it, it's actually painful. And you know why? You know why. It's because walking on sand feels just like I'm walking on broken glass. And that's no coincidence. Glass has been described as superheated sand that is chemically inert. Therefore, even discarded glass, it would follow, is not really waste. It does not leach, poison, or contaminate anything. Rock-like, it is heavy and sinks to the bottom of bodies of water. Then, the ocean can make it into the most beautiful and inspirational of all of the beach stuff, sea glass. So why can't we just let the glass that we have go ahead and do that? Why should we go through the fraught and complicated processes of manufacturing and recycling glass? Yep, hard to make and hard to recycle. That's glass for you. Glass manufacturing is expensive and intensive and has always been labor consumptive. The problem is that it is valuable and singular in its abilities. Glass has been prized for centuries as a luxurious, precious medium. Besides being beautiful, glass is made from non-toxic raw materials. Glass containers are impermeable, airtight, and transparent. Glass does not deteriorate, corrode, stain, or fade. In short, glass is worth the extraordinary effort that it takes to produce it. It is more than science, it is art. So because we choose to produce it, we should then recover and recycle it. It saves energy and carbon emissions to recycle glass. Recycling a ton of glass saves more than a ton of the raw materials required to make it. Glass can be recycled over and over again without degrading. And recycled glass is food safe. Glass recycling is a closed loop. It creates no waste or byproducts. And though it is difficult, recycling glass is less arduous, time and energy consuming than making it. Glass is hard to recycle and even harder to manufacture. Why would I do this at all, you might ask, as you A, walk across a hot beach, or B, attempt to recycle or worse, manufacture glass? Compared to this stuff, glass is heavy, expensive, and delicate. Imagine this though. If these looked like this, then could this eventually look like this? See? And just like that, we're back on the beach, walking through the sand. We all know that it is not that fast and certainly not too easy. An intrepid visionary man once said that we choose to do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Of course, he was talking about going to the moon, so that is a little different from glass recycling. Still, it is the painstaking application of science to produce an artful purpose. Things that are luxurious and precious are often arduous, time, and energy consuming to acquire, and worth it every time.
We've all seen photos of plastic bags blowing in trees, plastic utensils littering beaches, and the poster child turtle having a plastic straw pulled out of its nose. People are now starting to notice the damage caused by single-use plastics and are looking for alternatives. Compostable plastics. They can perform the same functions as single-use plastic with the benefit of being able to be composted. Problem solved, right? Not so much. Many factors determine if a compostable item will actually compost. Temperature, moisture, light, oxygen. But one thing is for sure, nothing composts in the landfill. If compostable plastic gets thrown into the garbage and ends up in a landfill, one of two things will happen. Option 1. It could be mummified and not degrade at all. Landfill excavations have found 40-year-old hot dogs and a head of lettuce 20 years old. They're able to date these items because newspapers that were thrown in the landfill also didn't compost and were still legible. Option 2. It breaks down with the other organic material in the no oxygen conditions of a landfill and produces methane, a powerful greenhouse gas. No compost is produced in landfills. Along with oxygen, compostable plastics also need a lot of heat. And do you know what's not hot? The ocean. Most compostable plastics that end up in the ocean or other bodies of water also won't compost. And they won't break down if they're littered on the ground. The only place compostable plastic should go is to an industrial compost facility. But even this has a catch. Not all composting facilities can handle every compostable product, because not all compostable products are made the same. For a local example, we're lucky to have Loris's industrial composting facility just outside of Saskatoon, but even they can't accept all types of compostable plastics. Even if compostable plastics magically end up getting composted, we still have the issue of items being produced for a single use. Creating compostable plastic still requires resources and designing things to be used once and discarded. So even if it is to a better place, it's still wasteful. So yes, in specific circumstances, replacing single-use plastics with compostable is better than plastic in the landfill. But the real solution is eliminating the need for single-use items altogether, no matter what they're made of, and developing ways to reuse products.
Hey everyone, my name is Daniel Moreau. Today I'm looking at pay-as-you-throw programs for waste. Pay-as-you-throw, also called trash metering, unit pricing, variable rate pricing, or user pay waste system, is a pricing model for disposing of municipal solid waste. Users are charged a rate based on how much waste they have out on collection day. For some municipalities that have adopted a PATE model, they have found a stable funding model, greater equity, and increased participation in recycling and organics programs. Some have also reduced the overall amount of waste going to the landfill.
One of the biggest fears of using a pay-as-you-throw model is charging for garbage will lead to increased illegal dumping. But do pay-as-you-throw programs cause more illegal dumping? I believe the answer is no, and here's why. To start with, let's look at what is illegal dumping. Illegal dumping is unauthorized disposal of waste on public or private property. It's dumping garbage in a back alley, it's dumping garbage in a ditch, it's putting garbage in your neighbor's cart, it's putting garbage in your recycling cart, also called contamination. Sierra Consulting surveyed 1,000 communities. What they found was that the fear is actually bigger than the reality when it comes to illegal dumping and pay-as-you-throw programs. Surveys showed issues in about 10 to 30% of the communities. Most issues were solved in the first 3 months. Some communities actually showed an improvement in the amount of illegal dumping. That being said, there are some important design considerations to think about if you're looking at a pay-as-you-throw model for your waste program. Consideration number 1, bulky items. Does your municipality have a program for bulky items? If you want to see less couches in back alleys or on the side of the street, look at a program. Even if it isn't fully cost recoverable, the cost might be better than paying cleanup crews overtime to clean up those annoying bulky items. Because sometimes it's a matter of people want to do the right thing, but they simply can't get that couch or fridge or stove out to the landfill. But by implementing bulky items program, you can make it that much easier for residents to put waste in the right place. Consideration number 2, program design. Every community is different, and every community has unique needs. If you're developing a pay-as-you-throw system for waste, one of the biggest mistakes you can make is charging too much for waste in the first year. Consider a phased-in approach. If you offer a big size and a small size, and the price difference is as big as $100 per month, people are going to try and make that small size work, even if it's a family of 8. It is about right sizing for the majority of your residents and finding a system that creates incentive while still provides capacity. Consideration number 3, market research. Look at current contamination trends in your region. For the city of Saskatoon, our curbside recycling contamination rate has grown from 4 to 5% in 2013 to over 10% in 2020 and still slowly rising. This is without implementing a pay-as-you-throw model. This is due to trends with well-intentioned people putting stuff in their blue cart that doesn't belong. A 2016 study by York University found that curbside recycling programs that used a clear bag at the curb with manual collection had a lower contamination rate than automated cart collection. Switching to carts may allow residents to hide their illegal dumping. For several municipalities that have adopted pay-as-you-throw and reported higher levels of legal use, it is important to note they also switched from bags to carts as part of switching to pay-as-you-throw. Consideration number 4, eyes on the street, education and enforcement. These are key components of any successful program. Make sure you plan the budget accordingly. A program change is a great time to reinvest in education and enforcement. If your municipality has grown by about 100,000 people, but the budget for education and enforcement hasn't grown, well, something might be off. Lastly, remember every municipality is unique and has different waste needs. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. If you have time, consider trying a pilot. Make sure you consider low-income families and seniors as part of your design. Also, don't forget about equity for businesses and multifamily residential dwellings. If you spend the time planning your pay-as-you-throw program, all the research I've read suggests that pay-as-you-throw doesn't automatically lead to increased illegal dumping. Should we consider illegal dumping when we design our programs? Absolutely. To leave you, a quote. One of the first things taught in introductory statistics textbooks is that correlation is not causation. It is also one of the first things forgotten. Good luck with your pay-as-you-throw programs. Take care, everyone.
Taxes. Considering the amount and types of taxes Canadians get to pay, taxes must be very popular. If we do something constructive that someone else pays for, like sit at a computer or chop wood, we get to pay an income tax. The more we earn, the more tax we need to pay. If we buy essential products, such as delicious pizza or oversized stuffed animals, we get to pay a sales tax. Sometimes we even get to pay 2 separate sales taxes. The more stuff we buy, the more tax we need to pay. If we do something destructive, like buy beer, other substances, or carbon-based fuels to burn, we get to pay even more tax as a punishment for doing something bad. Please note that no actual carbon-based fuel was directly burned during the preparation of this presentation. Sometimes, even if we try to do something fun, like visit a national park or other public facility, we get to pay a user fee, which some consider to be just another type of tax. Everywhere we turn, there seems to be another cost to pay. On top of all these regular taxes, we get to pay even more when we buy something that can be recycled, like lubricating oil, antifreeze, or electronics from a reputable business. They even have the nerve to call this extra cost an environmental handling charge, or EHC, and tell us that the money is used to run a recycling program for these things. But the EHC is really just another tax, right? Taxes, just like EHCs, cost me money, and I have no input as to how they are spent. Plus, they are both annoying. EHCs are just another tax grab. But wait, are they really a tax? Taxes have many characteristics, but let's just focus on a few. Taxes are levied by the government. In our case, the province of Saskatchewan and the country of Canada levy income and sales taxes. The government gets to determine how much tax we pay. EHCs are actually determined by industry. Producers and manufacturers get to decide how much the EHC is so that they can cover the cost of recycling and end-of-life management for their products. The government only says that there needs to be a recycling program, not how to fund it or run it. Taxes, of course, need to be collected. It is the law to pay taxes. Tax collectors have been around for millennia, and they take their job very seriously. There is no such law that industry has to charge an EHC. In fact, each industry member could choose to bury the EHC in the product price. As long as there is an effective recycling program for the designated products, the law does not care if EHCs are collected or if it's funded in some other way. There is, of course, one similarity. EHCs and taxes both need to be paid, and as a result, the consumer ends up with a little less money. All taxes are paid to the government. EHCs are not paid to the government. They are collected by industry voluntarily and used to pay for recycling and end-of-life management programs. In the case of used oil, oil filters, antifreeze, and plastic oil antifreeze and DEF containers, the money goes to SARC so that we can manage a province-wide recycling network for these materials. No money from the EHCs goes to government. Collected taxes provide common benefits to all and can be spent at the discretion of the government. Once payment is received and placed into general revenue, the government can use that tax money for whatever they see fit, even if you don't agree with how it is spent. For EHCs, the money is typically handled by a not-for-profit corporation that is governed by its own bylaws with oversight from its members to make sure that the EHC money is used for the intended purposes only, that is, managing their products end of life to minimize environmental effects and ensuring that the true cost of this management is paid for by those producing and using these products, instead of offloading that cost on society. EHCs go directly to help reuse materials that would otherwise be wasted, to prevent an environmental impact if they were improperly disposed of, and help lower landfill costs by making sure that these materials are not simply tossed out with the trash. In conclusion, although EHCs might look like a tax on your receipt, they are really just a good way to fund programs that keep reusable, potentially hazardous, and difficult to manage materials out of our landfills and the environment. I hope that this presentation has established that the statement, environmental handling charges are just another tax grab, is a myth. Thank you.
Transporting uranium waste. On-site burial is the safest and best option. For mine wastes, otherwise called tailings, it's best to put it back where you found it. And what are mine tailings anyway? Mostly finely ground up rock, basically. The milling process extracts the ore, in this case uranium, from the parent material. The leftover parent material needs to go somewhere, and the mine site engineer specially builds facilities to store this material. Essentially, these tailings facilities are specialized landfills. Material in the tailings is other minerals and some residues from the milling process. In Saskatchewan uranium mines, these other minerals can include trace amounts of nickel, manganese, arsenic, iron, and radium. Remember, the uranium has been removed because that's what they were mining. How radioactive are uranium mill tailings? It varies depending on the amount of radium and other uranium decay products. So what are the issues with uranium waste? Transportation. The shorter the distance the material needs to move, the safer it will be. Keeping materials on site eliminates the possibility of spills and incidents in transport and reduces possibility of exposure. Toxicity. The tailings material does contain contaminants that could cause issues in the environment, so they do need to be contained. Aesthetics. The tailings facilities are different than the surrounding landforms during operation, but are designed to fit the landforms once they are decommissioned. Future land use. Tailings facilities should be restricted from future incompatible land uses. In Saskatchewan, uranium mines are in the north, far from populated areas and relatively isolated. The other question is, where would these uranium wastes go other than on site where they were mined? We could imagine the issues with trying to select a suitable site that people in that area would accept. The main things that make on-site disposal the best and most effective option are the materials can be transported in pipelines over short distances, lowering the likelihood of transportation incidents. The materials can be dewatered over time on sites, helping to consolidate the material and greatly reduce the movement of material out of the tailings mass. If the material is placed in mined-out pits, as is the current practice in all of the active uranium mines in Saskatchewan, there will not be any surface dams or dikes that will need to be maintained over time. For in-pit tailings facilities, this is how they work. First, a drain layer is placed at the bottom of a mined-out pit. Tailings are placed over the drain layer so that water can be collected in the drain and pumped for treatment. As the water is drawn out of the tailings, the material consolidates and becomes increasingly impermeable, helping to contain contaminants. A water cover is kept over the material during operations for protection from radiation and freezing. Once tailings placement is complete, a soil cover is placed on top of the tailings, and in most cases, a water cover will be placed over this. After completion of operations and following the decommissioning process, you end up with landforms that look something like this.
It's a health risk. Reusable containers can't be accepted by public food vendors. That's the myth I'm here to discuss today. Food facilities can generate a lot of waste in the form of food containers. Many consumers would like to bring their own reusable containers to facilities to reduce waste. But are they allowed? Yes, they are. This myth is false. Generally, the reason given for this statement is that it's a health concern. Food facilities in Saskatchewan are required to comply with the food safety regulations. Food facilities include, but are not limited to, restaurants, takeout food facilities, and grocery stores. These regulations do not prohibit the use of reusable containers provided by the customer. Of course, there are food safety considerations to this practice that facilities would be required to observe. Food safety considerations have been identified as the number of consumers bringing their own containers have increased. Food safety concerns include the potential for cross-contamination due to improperly cleaned or sanitized containers, contamination of the bulk food source from unsanitary conditions or dispensing practices, chemical contamination from the use of non-food grade containers by consumers, and physical contamination from damaged, broken, or chipped containers, especially with glass or ceramic containers. While there are no health regulations, of course, absorbent materials that cannot be cleaned and sanitized would not be permitted, such as this pizza box. The Ministry of Health in Saskatchewan has developed a fact sheet to guide food facilities into safely implementing this practice if they so choose. While food facilities may implement policies above and beyond the requirements in the regulations for food safety, it is important to note that health officials may also take action against a food facility to have this practice discontinued should it pose a risk to public safety. There are three main approaches that facilities are looking at when considering appropriate use for customer-provided containers: bulk food purchases, takeaway food and drinks, and packing up leftovers from restaurants. Bulk food purchases in a grocery or retail situation hold the greatest potential for cross-contamination as a food safety risk to occur. Uses of customer-provided containers for takeaway food and drinks in restaurants also pose a food safety risk. Both of these risks can be mitigated by following the following recommendations. Public education on proper wash, rinse, sanitize procedures are posted and available within the facility. Screening criteria for acceptance of containers based on cleanliness, and explaining that policy well to both customers and employees. Empowering employees to reject the acceptance of damaged or dirty containers, and allowing the customers to understand why this is the case. Not that you're not allowing containers at all, but that you need to have standards for the acceptance of those containers to provide the best food safety practices possible. Cross-contamination is a serious issue when it comes to high-risk food. Coffee shops commonly allow customers to bring their own reusable cups. This is an acceptable practice from a food safety perspective. It is also acceptable for customers to provide their own leftovers containers to pack up leftovers. Both of these situations with customer-provided containers are relatively low risk from a food safety perspective. Employees would have to keep in mind, just like when they touch anything else and in between performing tasks, that hand hygiene is important, as well as ensuring that the container that they accept to fill, if they will be handling it, is clean and in good repair. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Jan Dai. It's a great pleasure to be able to speak to you about AI technology and reducing the cost of curbside collection. Imagine for a moment, wouldn't it be wonderful if an operator could just drive up alongside a cart, and then when stopped, the arm automatically goes out, grabs the cart, dumps it and places it back on the curb? This would give the operator time to scan the environment instead of having to worry about manipulating the joystick and where the location of the cart is. Wouldn't it be wonderful if it just all happened automatically? Well, with AI technology, that is possible. 3 conditions have to be met though. First of all, you have to be able to identify the carts, put a bounding box around them. You have to be able to optimize the lift cycle and program your robotic arm to do that, even keeping the lid open or closed, depending on what the client requires. And you have to have an operating system which is really easy to use. So let's talk about these and see if they're possible. I'm sure many of you have seen pictures like this of a street scene which identifies people, street lights, cars, etc. AI vision recognition is the ability of a computer program to identify patterns in the image, put a box around it, and give it a label. These programs are far from perfect, and in this case, the street light, which is circled in red, was in fact missed. We have taken the same approach to identify curbside carts, and we have trained a computer model to be able to identify them. Along the way, there were many challenges, including open boxes, boxes in different lighting conditions, and carts in different types of conditions. We also had to make sure that we didn't identify items that were not carts. So with our model, and depending on the conditions, we are able to achieve over 99% accuracy rate for identification of carts with virtually 0 false positives. Once we put a box around the cart, we were able to identify its XYZ coordinates relative to the truck. So, are we able to identify carts using AI recognition? Absolutely, yes we can. And that brings us to the second condition that must be met. Can we program the robotic arm to pick up, dump, and replace the cart back on the curb as fast as your quickest operator? As you are all aware, it takes time for a human to learn how to complete this task. Some operators are naturally good at it, most operators are okay, and some never really quite get there. We have studied the components of the optimal cycle, the approach, the knifing in, the lift, and the release. We don't have time to go into details, but our research and our studies have shown that we are as good as, or perhaps slightly better than, the best operators. So are we able to meet the second condition, the ability to automate the arm as fast as the best operators? Yes, we can do that too. That brings us to the third condition. Is the system easy and intuitive to use, like using the cruise control on your car? We developed the concept of a combined go dead man switch. As the operator approaches the cart, they activate the go button, which enables pre-movement of the arm. When the truck is properly stopped in front of the cart, the arm will automatically complete the lift and the return cycle. If the operator releases the go dead man switch, like for a safety issue, the system will automatically stop. He presses the go switch again, it will complete the cycle. Or if he pulls back on the switch, it will take the robotic arm back to the home position. So, is it easy to use, like the cruise control on the car? Yes, it is. In fact, we have one customer who's got 2 employees on long-term disability because they are no longer able to use a joystick. With our system, they can now go back on the road because our system does not require the joystick to operate. It is simple and easy to use. So, can AI technology reduce the cost of curbside collection? Yes, it can. We're able to identify carts, automate the operation of the robotic arm with an easy-to-use and very intuitive control systems. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, and I can be reached at cartseeker.com. Thank you very much, and I look forward to speaking with many of you. Thank you.
Many municipalities across the province do not allow landfill scavenging in their bylaws. Scavenging is also prohibited in some landfill operation permits issued by the Ministry of Environment. The practice is also considered unsafe and is a cause of concern in terms of occupational health and safety regulation. Just think about everything that could go wrong if people could enter a landfill pit like this one without wearing protective equipment. I'm going to present you with some safer alternatives. Construction materials can be set aside for reuse. These nicely organized doors and windows were brought by community members at the transfer station, and they could be picked up by others who needed them for their projects. The same can be done with small appliances like lawnmowers or any other items that are still working or in need of a minor repair. People who are handy can merge 2 broken items into one working one. There are many possibilities when these items are set aside for pickup. Every municipality can start its own program. It only requires a clean and safe area to get started. You can also find great items for grab, like this poker table or some movies. These were set aside at another transfer station. Great initiatives like this allow many items to be diverted from the landfills. We often see perfectly fine bicycles in the metal recycling piles. A lot of them are children's bicycles that are now too small for their growing owners, but otherwise are in very good shape. Instead of treating these bicycles as limited-use items, why not setting them aside for reuse? That's what is happening here on this picture that was taken near the entrance of a regional landfill. This area is used as a dropping grounds for bicycles, and other families in need just come and pick what they need. There's also a possibility to partner with some charitable groups who can pick up the excess bicycles, fix them as needed, and donate or sell them for small fees to those who need them. Bicycle reuse is a great initiative that is gaining in popularity in the province. If your municipality doesn't have a similar program, please consider donating old bicycles to charities or to your neighbors with younger children. And once started, why stopping at bicycles? Some other locations prevented motorbikes and snowmobiles from being landfilled. However, let me add a word of caution here. You want to keep your dedicated area clean and safe for the users, and you want to keep the items away from the other piles. Now, leaving the landfill and transfer stations, we can find treasures in exchange groups on social media. A lot of these groups allow you to give and take objects for free, and nowadays it is very easy to post an ad with a picture from your smartphone. A few clicks can prevent a lot of reusable items from reaching the landfills. We can also go to a yard sale, but only when and where it's allowed. Finally, there are many recycling programs in Saskatchewan. For more information, I invite you to watch Brienne Bennett's presentation today entitled Working Together to Reduce Waste in Saskatchewan. It will be presented at 1 p.m. Thank you.
I'd like to talk to you for a few moments about the evolution of uncontrolled scavenging at landfills and transfer stations into something more evolved, something that is being called more and more often licensed or controlled salvaging or upcycling operations. My first thought or reaction when I think about scavenging at a landfill or transfer station facility is generally an image which strikes fear to my heart. Mostly thought of how to protect the public from dangers associated with these facilities. As we know, landfills and transfer stations can be extremely hazardous facilities, especially for the public when they're unfamiliar with the operations and equipment at those sites. When I think about the development of formalized or licensed scavenging programs at a landfill site or transfer station, what I'm really thinking about is how to reduce the liability to the owners or the operators of that facility, and how to protect the public from harm and still allow them access to those materials at the site. An example of an uncontrolled scavenging operation of the past can be found up at the Yellowknife landfill in an area known by the locals as Waikea. This area has been established to allow for people to drop off materials that may be useful to others, and then to have access to that area to rummage through and find materials which may be useful to them for household repurposing. An example of the evolution from uncontrolled scavenging to controlled or licensed scavenging, as it was called at this particular site, can be found at an interior British Columbia landfill, where they attempted to establish an area for contractors to drop off clean wood waste, where then they would have access to that area under a memorandum of understanding or agreement to then upcycle those materials. Lessons learned from this facility was that despite the best intent, there is additional resources required from the regional district or the landfill owner to continue to maintain those sites and those stockpiles to reduce the liability, to ensure that those materials don't become a hazard to the site. A great example of a very simple controlled salvaging operation can be found at a small rural transfer station, where the gate attendants saw a need to provide an area for people to drop off useful goods and have access to those within a safe manner. They fashioned a small shed in a corner of the site and then started pointing people towards that area to drop off useful goods that may be reused or repurposed. As part of this evolution of organized or licensed salvage operations at landfills and transfer stations, we've seen numerous reuse it or take it or leave it sheds being constructed at these sites. These areas provide for safe, dry, clean areas for people to drop off and pick up materials for salvage or reuse. As part of this evolution, we're also seeing the public getting more and more actively involved in upcycling and recycling operations. A great example of that is found in Okotoks, Alberta, where the Foothill Salvage and Recycling Society has established a take it or leave it upcycling facility, which the public can then access materials for reuse. We've also seen a number of commercial operations evolve over the years to further formalize or license salvaging. A great example is the Edmonton Architectural Clearinghouse, which was established back in the late 80s, which salvages building materials and brings those materials to a centralized location for the public to be able to access those materials for purchase at significant discounts. In summary, we've come a long way from uncontrolled scavenging of the past and have seen the evolution of controlled and licensing salvage operations that can run complementary with our solid waste management systems, both landfills and transfer stations. There are tremendous examples out there, both from the public, private, and nonprofit perspective on how we can operate and develop and evolve, ultimately, these upcycling operations.
Welcome to this segment. We are looking at busting the myth that moving towards a leasing society creates excess waste. For the most part, we are known to be large consumers and exploiters of resources and raw materials, but we are less on conservation. We're a typical cradle to the grave society as far as resources and waste are concerned. Much of it we produce, we use, and then we dump. Our best example is nature, that in its quest to give us a healthy environment, shows us that every aspect of the ecosystem contributes to conservation. Nature simply renews itself. Take, for example, the snake. It sheds its old skin for a new one. Dirty water follows the natural filtration system through soil and sand to be clean. The dung beetle, it knows how to clean up after everyone. Not to be beaten is the osprey, repurposes the twigs to create its own home. With this, you can see that nature has a cradle-to-cradle approach to renewing itself. From these examples, I'm sure you can hear the invitation from nature to join its ongoing crusade of self-renewal. It has pointed us to wind and sun energy. It is pointing us further to reduce waste by buying and owning less. Therefore, ownership, zero ownership, does not increase waste. The less we own, the less we waste. Moving towards a leasing society has the potential to reduce waste. The commercial sector must at least pay attention to natural cycles and be challenged to be sensitive to the ecological limits of the planet. This way, the manufacturer will create products that are durable and reusable or naturally decomposable at end of life. A leasing society model challenges manufacturers to design sustainable products through economic incentives. This way, the profit will shift from the selling of those products to the leasing fees of the product with reduced ownership. Producer responsibility becomes critical in order to create durable and more sustainable products that perform without cost throughout the lease period. The most durable and resource efficient product will be the most economical product. Examples are showing that there have been cases of going towards a leasing society with durable and rentable tires in one place, and in another, phones for lease, and yet another, the flourishing chemicals and carpets leasing markets. These and many more are current challenges for going towards a leasing society in order to create less waste. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, love to see those videos. I want to thank all of our presenters here for submitting their videos and taking on the task here and busting some myths across the waste world here in Saskatchewan and across the greater world. I collected a bunch of the questions that we asked in the chat, and I will bring them up and ask some of our presenters that too. But if anybody has any more as we're going through, feel free to put them into the chat and I'll try and catch them as we go. I wanted to jump back right to the first. Chantel kind of answered this, but I'd like to get a little bit more details if we can. Lisa had asked, is Sarcan considering extending glass recycling beyond Saskatoon and Regina, their current arrangements?
Here I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Yeah, no, that is all up for discussion right now. And no, I can't really say much more about it except that it's being discussed.
Okay, it's okay. We appreciate the relative transparency. Graham Donaldson had asked back to the uranium mines question, and actually we had kind of a twofer here. So maybe Tim, if I can get you to address both of these. What type of post-closure commitments are there for monitoring at uranium mines? And also, when it comes to uranium waste, what are your comments on the question regarding tailings versus spent fuel?
Well, let's start with the second question first. Again, we don't have any spent fuel repository systems in Saskatchewan, and there isn't any spent fuel produced in Saskatchewan either. So that's why I didn't address the spent fuel issue. I know with spent fuel, the volumes tend to be relatively small compared to other types of power production when we're talking about that. So that's one of the positives with respect to spent fuel storage. Again, some of those products can also be reused, so disposal isn't necessarily the final end use for some of that material. In terms of post-closure commitments, the province has an institutional control program that's been set up to manage uranium and other hard rock mining facilities on leased government land into the future. So those are company funded programs. Any of the companies that are looking at being released from decommissioning, providing funds to the institutional control program to make sure that those facilities, that there's long-term monitoring in place to ensure that that stuff is looked after basically in perpetuity.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Tim. I correct me if I'm wrong, Kelsey Dale is not here, correct?
That's correct, yeah. I did note that her, the document she referred to.
So, yes, the documents that she referred to are in the files for some more information. We can't really go into the questions about COVID-19 related things, but I'm sure Kelsey would welcome your questions, and I think we might be able to share her contact information with anybody who is interested afterwards. Henry had asked Ethan a question on the fees. Is it possible to have recycled materials offset the user fees for
yeah, hi, thanks for the question. Certainly the value of the recycled material does get factored into what those user fees might look like. For our particular program, used oil has typically had a positive value once it's been collected and aggregated. So it has historically been kind of one of the easier ones to handle because somebody would always be willing to purchase that liter of used oil once it's easy to get. So our task was to really amalgamate and aggregate. For something like plastic containers, oily plastic containers, that has a negative value. So we need to make sure that the environmental handling fees make it are such that the collection and processing of that still has a positive value, and it really does balance out what that EHC needs to be on that product. If it's easy to recycle and has a residual value, the EHC is going to be lower than if it's more difficult to recycle and has a negative value. One interesting thing about COVID in the last little while is that we've seen a radical shift in oil prices over the last 6 months. Kind of unprecedented when we have I think unleaded gas ended up being like closer to 40 cents a liter at the pumps. And that, of course, changes the residual value of that recycled oil and then impacts the economics. But yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks a lot, Ethan. Alonzo had asked a question earlier on, and this I think could be opened up to a couple of different presenters if anybody wants to tackle it. But how long will plastic bags take to be recycled? And I think we can kind of extend that and look at in a landfill situation, in a non-landfill situation. So does anybody want to try and tackle that? No? No takers? Okay, well, if anybody gets a burning desire to tackle the plastic bag recycling, speak up and we'll swing around back to it. For now, I'll jump. Henry had another question for Jan on his. What kind of costs would be associated with the AI robotics for curbside recycling? And Krista had asked about how they hold up Canadian weather swings. I know you had answered them briefly in the comments here, but do you want to just talk a little bit more about that? Maybe give us some more details?
Yes, I certainly can. So I'll deal with the second question first about Canadian winters. I guess I missed showing some shots of the carts in the wintertime with our bounding boxes on them. We have certainly developed the AI component with lots of winter scenes, dark, light, and everything else. So identifying the carts has not been a problem whatsoever in Canadian winters. In fact, winters makes it a little bit easier because they're a little bit more distinct from the snow as they are from the grass, for example. So a green cart on green grass is harder to identify than a green cart on white snow. So from the AI perspective, being able to identify the carts is absolutely not a problem. We've run these systems through a number of winters here in Canada as well, making sure the sensors all work, making sure all your cabling works and all those type of things. So yes, it's geared towards the Canadian winters. Absolutely no doubt about that. The other questions on costs. So we estimate between a 1 and 2 second savings per actual cycle, per actual pickup. So cost savings are really going to depend a little bit on how many carts you pick up in a single day, how much driving you have between carts, and those type of things in here. And the systems will cost between around roughly $20,000 per truck, all in. So that's your cost of installing, our cost of supplying the equipment and everything else. And again, based on the numbers, that's works out to roughly a 2.5 to 3 year payback on the system. So you can get some benefits on the cost side. You also get some benefits on the savings side. It's easy for an operator to use. We've had some operators go off because of repetitive strain injuries. We deal with all those issues. You no longer need to use a joystick every day. So there are a host of other benefits besides just the cost as well.
Great, thanks a lot, yeah. We have a couple of questions here about the glass, and so that was Chantel's presentation, but it's not specific to Sarcan, so if anybody else wants to speak about this too, go for it. The first one is looking at local options for glass recycling, such as local construction, landscaping, glass beaches, things like that. Chantel, do you have any thoughts on that? And anybody else, do you want to maybe follow up?
Love the idea of recovering glass any way you can. I think that sounds great. Glass beaches, great.
Anybody have any examples of maybe where that's been done around the province here? No, well, it sounds like we've got a gap in the system. So if anybody's got any innovative partners or entrepreneurs looking to take something on, then we might have some opportunities here in Saskatchewan to be reusing some of our local glass. There's another glass related question about window pane glass. Chantel, can you speak to that at all?
I don't know much about that. What was the question?
Just about window pane glass. Yeah, generally I think we consider that unrecyclable. Alonzo said that he gets a lot of that.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything that can be done with that, honestly.
Can you speak a little bit about maybe what the complicated aspects of that are?
It's different composition from the other glass. So it's a different process to sort of recover and deal with it, and it's just a different thing.
Okay. Yeah. Just speaking on the glass too, it looks like Colleen has just shared with us that Potter's Glass in Moose Jaw takes clear bottle glass and makes beads for reflective paint. So there's a local option that's starting to take shape. Joanne's given us a question for either Dominique or Michael. So either one of you can feel free to take care. But how much do scavenging programs happen on their own? And do they need some sort of incentive or support to kind of take shape?
Dominique, do you want to start that one, or should I?
Oh, you can go ahead. We can both talk, I guess.
Sure. So I tend to think about it as two different things. We have scavenging occurring, which we consider more of an illicit activity. Typically at transfer stations and at landfill or solid waste facilities, we've got rules in place to prohibit scavenging just because it's an uncontrolled activity. We're starting to see this idea of licensed salvage, or they're sometimes even calling it licensed scavenging, but I really think they should differentiate between salvage and scavenge. So we're starting to see more of these salvage operations occurring, people starting to realize that there are valuable materials that are being thrown away, and putting in these systems to encourage it in a controlled manner. Reuse it facilities, reuse it huts or sheds, or even just very simple shelters, allowing people to then divert those materials on site before they go into the bins. The dicey area is when we start throwing materials into bins or into the active face and trying to keep the public from accessing those materials at that point, because that's when the real risk is going to occur in terms of accidents and injuries. So it have to be very much a system with the fill operators or owners being involved in the process to create the infrastructure to allow for these materials to be diverted. Anything you want to add to that, Dominique?
Excellent. Dominique, did you have any follow-up? Oh, did we lose you, Dominic?
Sorry, I think it was on mute. I muted the other one. Sorry. That's yeah, everybody does that, I know. Yes, I was saying this is a great answer, and people can also call us at the ministry if they have questions about what they can and cannot do and where to put their pile for reuse. We can help them, and when we do inspection, same thing. We can help them with that. And yeah, these things, most of the initiative I showed are the site that came up with these ideas. We sometimes encourage them, like if you've seen me on site, I like the bike recycling idea. This is great, I think, for also social programs. But most of these other ideas come from the operator, sometimes from the place themselves. So it's not. I think it's all great, and yes, they can contact us for more info too.
Excellent. Oh, sorry. I think I had a bit of a lag there. But Lisa had suggested that municipal councils have difficulty removing a service from an established property tax base. So I guess our question there is, how can we sell that sort of thing to municipal councils? And also, I had another question that I was considering as you're going through, kind of related, but on the public side. Facts don't often trump feelings for people on topics like this. So how can we help municipal councils buy into the idea? And then how can we help to reduce the fear of things like illegal dumping among the public?
Yeah, so with pay-as-you-throw and funding, I think it's complicated. I think it's different for every municipality. But from the work I've done on it, one of the things that the City of Calgary did is they laid out like a 5-year plan where they're not just changing it over 1 year. It's a 5-year transition. And each year they're taking a bit off their mill rate, and then they're putting a bit more onto user fees. And to your question of how do you get buy into the facts, I think the big thing is just starting slowly. And I mean, no matter what, change is hard. And we saw that with curbside recycling in Saskatoon. And then by year 2, year 3, their solid waste system. So yeah, with pay-as-you-throw, I think you could definitely have a transition where you're not trying to get all of the property tax onto a user fee. I definitely think that you're easing it so that residents can buy in, and some municipalities, step 1 is just getting some sort of fee in place, and then step 2 is creating incentive for actually encouraging recycling or composting.
Excellent. Yeah. Meg, I want to jump over to you with one. I know you tend to be very involved in sort of on the ground initiatives when it comes to waste management, recycling, and engaging the community. What are some of the most effective mechanisms that you're starting to see now for how to reduce the use of single-use plastics? And that might be either sort of at the larger producer level or sort of more grassroots on the consumer level.
I mean, my experience is mostly with like just the general public. And I think that normalizing things, so seeing people use certain things in public, encourages other people to also use it. I mean, I'm seeing the same thing with just wearing masks in public, right? You see someone wear it and then you're more comfortable wearing it the next time. So I noticed that the more people that have like reusable produce bags at the grocery store, the more common it is for someone else to do it. I mean, I've even had people come up to me and be like, oh, that's a great idea, I should do that. So just having things visible, just doing things yourself can also be like a really great way of educating others without being a little bit too pushy. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I'll also jump over to Ethan now. You had mentioned that it doesn't really matter where the money comes from, just what that money actually takes care of doing. So that said, even though you were telling us about the use of EHCs, what are some other alternatives to EHCs that you know of that might still be able to get the job done?
Well, as I mentioned in the presentation, the province of Saskatchewan actually encourages visible environmental handling fees on their receipts because if you split it out on your receipt, you don't end up paying extra tax on it, which gets back to the theme of my tax discussion. So the other option is for companies to just pay for that out of pocket, right? So they can either absorb that cost or mark up their product accordingly to pay for that recycling. But one way or the other, the money needs to flow into a stewardship program in order to handle those materials that have a negative residual value at the end of the day or need some help to move along, right? There may be other products out there that are always easy to recycle. I'm pretty sure something like metal recycling, right? Iron and copper have a residual value as a scrap metal, and so maybe an EHC isn't required to encourage folks to aggregate their metal and drop it off at a metal dealer, right? So I guess to say that there are alternatives to EHCs, yeah, sure there are, but one way or the other, the legislation is set up such that the producers and users of those materials end up paying the true cost of that end-of-life management, and whether it's an EHC or just a slightly higher purchase price, that money has to come from somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thanks a lot. Henry, Joanne has asked, are there any examples of leasing societies or businesses that are running sort of leasing services that you think are particularly successful that you can point us to?
The examples that I mentioned there were started by the Michelin tires. They were doing tires for lease, but unfortunately the program hasn't continued. And also the funds for lease, that too has not continued. So there are still challenges of having something that is continuous is in there as a program. So they both cases, they ran into some issues and they couldn't continue with the leasing program. But still the challenge stands that this can be done. Just the logistics and the support.
Jenna had given a follow-up question actually, and I think we can bring it right back to the best company in the world, of course, SaskTel. Can you talk more about the cell phone leasing program your company does and if it's been successful in reducing waste around the province?
We've moved more into refurbishing phones and then donating them to the women's shelters. That's what we're doing much more than the leasing one. Again, the challenge is there to lease phones. When they return those phones, you have to do work on them and so on. So still a topic for discussion, actually.
Do you find the costs of, say, maintaining those phones that you get back or repairing them is a primary barrier right now? Like, are the actual costs to maintaining the back end of that leasing program, are they something that is pretty difficult for a company like SaskTel, a large company, to deal with?
The cost on the repairs and refurbishing, because each user depends on how they manage the phone they get. So those costs are just not great to maintain a leasing program until such a time that the costs can be offset. That will be something. And then, of course, customers' demand right now is much more into some sophisticated kind of phones and so on. Again, the company can't keep up with that pace, the need that the customer has. You'd rather send the customer to get themselves a new phone that they want. Yeah, so those prohibitions will keep us waiting until the conducive time.
It looks like Kelsey's going to be joining us soon, so I might hit her up with some of the container questions. But kind of close to that, I realized there was a question we had from Aaron previously, looking at COVID-19 and the fact that with reusable containers being limited, might have been an increase in the waste volumes of single-use materials. Do you know if anybody here would like to comment on that? Has anybody seen any issues with an increase in single-use materials?
I would comment that for like the bulk industry, like bulk food has kind of gone down. You've noticed that most of the grocery stores, all of the bulk sections are blocked off. I think the only places you can get bulk food right now is Bulk Basket and Bulk Barn. So that alone has kind of started a lot of more plastic in the food section, as well as I've noticed that some of the local produce places have everything bagged now instead of being able to pick your own in your produce bag. So like that area of personal waste, I think, has increased quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. And even then, like you had mentioned, with Bulk Basket and Bulk Barn being the only places, I believe you have to call and arrange your orders with those places now. So for a lot of people who buy bulk, I think it's a lot of kind of searching around to see what you got in scavenging. So that's probably dissuading people as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for Bulk Basket, they've got everything on their website. And you have to pre-order.
Mm-hmm. Graham just made a good point there too. I think a lot of people are using a lot of disposable coffee cups lately because some places have been discontinuing the use of refilling reusable mugs. Hopefully, if we can get Kelsey in here soon, we might be able to ask her about that because she might be able to comment more on that. Does anybody else have any questions while we're waiting on that?
Just to answer Joanne's question of an example of like a leasing thing, there's actually a business out of Saskatoon called Pivot, and they lease furniture. So you can just rent a couch for like $20 a month, and they've got all sorts of different furniture. So that's an example of leasing that's local.
Mm-hmm. I've actually, I know a couple of people who've started to take on Pivot and they really like it. Some people, especially I think in older generations, seem a little hesitant about the whole leasing furniture side of things. But I've been finding that a lot of people, especially renters, with the cost of their membership and the cost of leasing, you'll get yourself a nice couch or something like that, often for less money than the cost of a new couch would be. And since those things are difficult to sell and get your money back off of anyway, then it just kind of makes things a lot more convenient and waste-free for people. So, Meg, on that topic, I also wanted to ask you just a personal question here, but other people might be able to benefit from. What's the Library of Things, their response to COVID? Are they still operating right now?
So we shut down as soon as the lockdown was happening because we're in the basement of the Better Good. So basically, as soon as the Better Good was closed, we closed down. The Better Good is open again, and we haven't reopened yet. We are allowed to. We're just kind of making sure like volunteers are safe and we feel comfortable with how things are going. I mean, luckily, because we don't deal with anything cost related, we have no, like as an organization, there's nothing negative about us being closed for too long. So we're just trying to make sure everything's safe and trying to avoid any dangers.
Yep. I needed a food dehydrator, so I was hoping you guys were open. I'm gonna have to wait for that one. Any other ones here? I noticed that Dale had given us a comment that there's been an increase in single-use gloves and masks in recycling stream. I don't think we have anybody from Loras here, but does anybody else maybe have some comments on complications that we might see in gloves and masks in the recycling stream? Because I know they're not necessarily common materials, so we're all of a sudden getting an influx of new materials that we're maybe not used to dealing with. Yeah, Aaron seems to agree with us on that one as well. I've seen that both Joanne and Graham here have mentioned they had to buy their own coffee maker and use a French press. I think this is COVID is kind of an opportunity for a lot of us in the waste industry to start looking at the businesses around us and our coworkers and our friends and things, and sort of encouraging people to start buying into more long-term resilient options like a French press or a coffee maker. Especially, if we can get them away from things like Keurig cups or anything like that. So I think this might give us an opportunity to have people start looking at the benefits of long-term use rather than single-use products. Yeah, it looks like Peter is telling us from India, gloves and masks are making up 50% of the dry waste right now, and they can't be recycled. So that's obviously going to be causing another major crunch for the waste industry globally. And Dale is talking about the safety hazard for employees at Loras. Natasha asking me a question. Good question. So at the U of S campus, we took on a glove recycling pilot that we were going to try and send some of our lab gloves to be recycled. Unfortunately, at the time being, it was being run out of the States. And so we had to ship all of our gloves there, which added a lot of extra costs for us because we had to package all the gloves together and send them across the border, which had some extra fees associated. Also, another complicating aspect was that the only gloves that could be part of it were Kimberly-Clark gloves because it was a Kimberly-Clark initiative and they all had to be packaged together. On campus, the amount of individual researchers is pretty huge, and they all kind of are in charge of their own buying. So we had to go around and canvass them and ask them to change over to, or if they'd be interested to change to Kimberly-Clark gloves. And for some reason or another, researchers tend to be very particular about the brands of gloves they use. So a lot of them weren't interested in doing that. One of the places where we saw a little bit more success in that is in the health sciences building, because unlike most of the other places on campus, they have lab managers on each floor. So those lab managers handle the purchasing of things like gloves for all of the labs on their floor. So we were able to go through a central resource, and we're trying to get more of the labs on campus over into that sort of system. Unfortunately, since we only really had 2 or 3 labs who were interested in doing it, it didn't really take off, but we're hoping to maybe take a look at that again in the future, because the company who was running that pilot actually, I believe, opened up a new processing facility somewhere in Ontario. So by eliminating the cross-boundary or the cross-border transport of those gloves, I think we might be able to save a lot on shipping and border fees and that. So I think we're going to take a look at that again in the future. Looks like Kelsey is here now. Kelsey, thanks for joining us.
Hey, you're welcome. Can you hear me?
Hey. Yes, we can.
Oh, good.
So
okay.
I think we had a lot of people interested in your talk there, and we were able to share the document that you gave us. But some questions for you here. Oh, I seem to have lost that question here.
I think I'd been emailing
Meg. I can remember what it was in the offhand right now.
Oh. Just about whether there was any difference in the information I provided during the COVID response, I think was something, I guess. Maybe a question that came up, or if it didn't, I can speak to it. And the answer is no. The guidance that we've put in place for reusable containers covers the most commonly spread bacteria and viruses, and that would include COVID. It's not spread in a unique manner. It's just that we know we have it in the community, so it's something to be mindful of. So it really does go back to the companies making sure they adhere to their policies about only accepting clean materials, and for the public to know that the risk is there. During the COVID response, some companies did stop the acceptance, ones that had previously accepted both containers and you probably saw the reusable bags at grocery stores. They said, don't do that for a while. That was a company policy decision. It wasn't a public health direction. And I think most of them have since revised that and are accepting customer provided bags and containers again for the places that did before.
Interesting, thank you. Just a quick follow-up on that. You had mentioned in your talk about how there's a lot of misconceptions around this area. I myself find the same thing in working on campus and just having to educate people on it. What do you think we can do to better educate people about the realities of using reusable containers and that it is allowed, just, you know, being conscious of the safety requirements, the cleanliness requirements? Is that something that is in the realm of governments to do? Do we need businesses to kind of step up and be better in communicating those things? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think like with most things, it's probably a combination, but sometimes things are more innovative or can happen a bit more quickly on the business side. So if there are businesses that are willing to promote that and educate their customers, that's a really good starting point. During my presentation, we shared that we have the public resource, which is targeted at businesses on how they can safely accept these kind of containers. But that is also intended to bring more awareness to the public. I think as the practice becomes more common and as people realize even the cost savings, but the waste savings as well, that they can move towards this, and then the government can provide reassurance that this is a safe practice. Because it does, I think, reuse a container, you think that old spaghetti stained container that somebody brought and it's like, oh, I don't want that touching my stuff. But that isn't how that isn't actually how reusing your container works. If I get my coffee cup filled up, it doesn't touch everybody else's coffee cup. So just sort of, busting those myths, this is the name of this, sort of during those conversations, both with businesses. Our public health inspectors now have this resource to share when they're doing inspections. So businesses that are on the fence about having a policy about it, or who try to say, oh, it's a public health policy, we can't accept it. We can say, no, it's not us. You're okay to do this if you want, and here's the facts behind doing it safely. So combo.
Yeah, Joanne threw in a question there. Just well, I got you. Are there special rules about customer containers for bulk purchases right now?
Right now, it would be more similar to non-bulk purchases or for store provided, because bulk foods aren't permitted in the same way right now due to the COVID response. But in regular times, when we get back to that, there's nothing different between sort of customer for bulk versus a customer handing an employee a container to fill. But right now, it would all be going through an employee to get filled because bulk foods aren't accessible, or they're gravity fed, in which case there's minimal contact as well.
Right. Giselle is also asking, you came in late, so we're getting an influx for you. Has there been a lot of uptake of businesses using customer provided containers? Any unique examples, how they're dealing with sanitizing?
Yeah, because it's not something they're required to mention or report, we don't really have a sense of how many businesses are using this. We've had a couple of inquiries from bigger chains, but otherwise it could be a lot or not very many yet. So that question's a little bit difficult to answer. In our research to develop the safety resource for businesses, there were a lot of really unique examples, not in Saskatchewan as much, but across Canada and across the world, in how they're dealing with this. There was a facility in Halifax, for example, and then a few other that it was customer provided containers, but it was on a sort of a return and receive basis. So you returned your dirty stuff, they cleaned and sanitized them properly, and then you got your food in a new clean container. So it was more of a loaner program almost for containers, which was an interesting approach. It unfortunately, I believe the one in Halifax wasn't able to maintain that. So they had put a lot of infrastructure, a lot of investment in that kind of system, and it didn't end up being possible for them. Some restaurant type facilities that we came across have sort of a designated commercial dishwasher because they can wash and rinse and sanitize really quickly. So they actually did that to all customer provided containers before filling them, regardless of how clean they looked. So
yeah, cool.
That was a neat solution. Using trays and stuff like that in delis. A lot of places in Europe have a lot of kind of unique solutions to that. So yeah, lots.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our time here. I want to thank all of our presenters for sending us their videos and giving us some great talks to think of. As some people have asked in the comments here, Joanne's going to try and make this video available for just public viewing through YouTube. So you'll receive some information about that after the conference. Some great suggestions about some of these small types of videos being put up on the blog and maybe put out to local TV resources. So we're definitely going to look at stuff like that. And if anybody has any more questions for any of our presenters, we are happy sharing their contact information, so you can reach out to them privately on a different occasion. Just before we leave, I want to thank Call to Recycle again for sponsoring our lightning talk session. And yeah, thanks for joining. We hope you have a great time at the rest of the conference.